Hello and welcome to this download from Blackwell Online. My name is George Miller. I'm delighted to say that my guest today is one of Britain's most eminent writers, Kazuo Ishiguro. In a career that spans almost 3 decades, Ishiguro has won both the Whitbread and the Booker Prizes and appeared twice on the Granta Best of Young Novelists list. He's written song lyrics and screenplays in addition to novels, but his many fans have had to wait until this month for him to publish his first collection of short stories. It's entitled Nocturnes, 5 Stories of Music and Nightfall, and depicts the dreams and disillusionments of musicians, young, old, and middle-aged. Why musicians? I asked him first.
For me, they're everyman figures a lot of the time, particularly these musicians who haven't quite made it. And a lot of the people in this book, they're musicians who didn't quite fulfill their dreams, or perhaps they're still young enough to think that their dreams will be fulfilled one day, but time is moving on. It's often people like that I've chosen, and I'm trying to portray ordinary lives. When do you let go of your dreams? When do you try and hold on to them? What do you sacrifice in your endeavor to fulfill these dreams? When are you just deluded? And when are you being courageous and authentic to yourself?
It's certainly true that music is de-romanticized in the stories. It seemed to me you were not so interested in describing music as looking at how music is a profession, a vocation, or at worst just a job that people are drawn to or fall into.
That is true. Well, at least that's often how music ends up for these people. It ends up as a job, but it's not just any job. In that it's a kind of, well, you use the word vocation there. I mean, it's something that people have gone into because there is a part of themselves that really believes in it. That they feel the music expresses something inside of them that cannot be expressed any other way. That somehow they represent themselves in the world better if they can represent themselves through music. And so I think it's very closely bound up with people's identity, their vision of themselves, who they are. And so when the world doesn't allow you to fulfill your career as a musician in quite the way you wish, that is a challenge to your very view of who you are or who you might be. So in that sense, looking at musicians tends to be, perhaps sometimes it can be more fruitful than looking at people in other jobs. But I think you can do this in, you can look at people in any kind of area of human endeavor, and I think you will find something very fascinating about people trying to fulfill a certain thing. I think I chose music because looking at musicians gave me a chance to look at how people struggle with personal dreams. But I think there were other reasons why I wanted the stories in Nocturnes to be bound by music. It wasn't simply music or musicians as metaphor. In a sense, I wanted, and this sounds slightly pretentious, but I wanted to write stories that had something of the quality of these bittersweet jazz songs. And that really was a starting point. Wouldn't it be nice to write a song that perhaps not only maybe had something of the plot line of some of these old Broadway songs, like One for My Baby, One for the Road, but actually had some of those qualities, the atmospheres, the bittersweet melancholy, but that kind of rather enduring stoicism that you find in those kind of the great American songbook songs.
You knew from the start, presumably, that you wanted this to be quite a tightly woven collection of stories. There are 5 pieces in it, and you've got recurring themes, as you've said, and even recurring character. So you knew it wasn't just going to be an accumulation of pieces which were loosely based around music from the start.
Well, to put it very simply, I mean, I sat down and wrote the 5 stories one after the other. In fact, in a way, I wrote them simultaneously. I have a big folder at home where there are notes for each story, and so the stories are being kind of developed together. And then, of course, when I physically kind of wrote the drafts, I had to do them in some order. But it was very much conceived like a book, like a single book. And the odd thing for me was that it wasn't so different from writing a novel. What you might call proper short story writers might raise an eyebrow at this, because in a way I am a novelist moonlighting in a different form. But I've gone about this rather in the way the novelists would. I've thought of it as a whole book. And actually, I'm used to the idea that there are 2 or 3 different narrative strands in a novel. Typically with a kind of a 250, 300 page novel, there's usually 2.5 kind of narrative strands that intertwine. And one of the challenges is to make these different narrative strands intertwine in a meaningful way, that they're not just sitting there side by side and jarring. There has to be an artistic reason why they're there. It should be more than a sum of their parts. And so that's a challenge that was oddly familiar from writing novels. I think that when you start to look at it, the border between novels and a book of short stories, if the short stories are conceived to go together, I think it's a much more blurred one than you would think. And this is one of the things I discovered as I was working on these. That I used to think the short story is a completely different form. Now I'm not so sure.
Let me ask you about writing comedy, because one story, although Come Rain or Come Shine, although it deals with disillusionment and what happens, and the possibility of relationships breaking down, there are also quite farcical elements in that story. How did you sort of approach that?
Because I was writing a book that had 5 discrete stories, it was very clear to me that you could switch the mood quite drastically, and in a sense you wanted a kind of variegation of moods. You didn't want every story to hit the same note, and so in a way you're pushed to write stories that contrast to some extent. So I started with a rather melancholy story, and then I wanted a funny story, and I felt very much that at least 2 of the stories should be humorous. It's a bit like I know these analogies are terribly tiresome and pretentious, but it's a bit like doing an album. I'm of the pre-downloading generation that thought of music very very much in terms of albums, and of course you mix the up-tempo number with the ballad and so on, and the catchy number with the long kind of more challenging track and so on. So my instinct was to mix the moods of the stories. So I did set out to write a couple of comic stories, and that one you mentioned, Come Rain or Come Shine, was very much conceived of from the start as the funny story, if you like. But I like personally I like kind of funny and sad at the same time, and often in like straightforward stage farce there is, of course, desperate tragedy. The best ones do have a sense of kind of desperate tragedy kind of welling up behind the kind of the humour. But also people like Woody Allen at his best in the 70s and 80s, I think, managed to combine that humour and pathos. Chaplin did as well. And I do like that, when you're not quite sure whether you should be laughing or crying. Maybe you should be doing both at the same time. So I was trying to go for that. And how I went about it, well, I mean, it's in a way, I mean, comedy is comedy. It's very hard to put apart how you do comedy. I do think comedy is risky, because I think more than anything else I've discovered that people's tastes differ enormously, and it's not just cultural either. In the same milieu, in the same community, some people just don't find some things funny, and other people find them hilarious. And I've tried to write comedy before, and sometimes people haven't noticed.